I have a confession to make. I just can't get into James Bond anymore. He used to be one of my favorite guys. I like superheroes. I like secret agents. James Bond is a badass. He's a wealthy jet setter with gadgets who goes and kick foreign terrorism in its ass. That's awesome. James Bond should be one of the coolest action franchises in the world. It deserves the spot it's earned. But lately I'm just not feeling it anymore, and there's a couple of reasons for that. These last movies, I know everybody else liked them, or at least most people like them, but I just couldn't get into them, and there are a couple of reasons for that. I think most of them have to do with the directorial style, but also with the way it's expressed in Daniel Craig's acting. Now don't get me wrong, Daniel Craig is a badass James Bond, but I'm not feeling it. And here's why. James Bond is supposed to be a wish fulfillment fantasy, right? Every guy who goes in that movie is supposed to say, I wish I were James Bond. And maybe a lot of people did. You know who didn't? Me. And there's a reason for that. James Bond, in the last 3 movies, as portrayed by Daniel Craig, is the most soulless, depressing man I have ever seen. The director goes out of his way to prove at every moment just how entirely nihilistically pointless James Bond's entire existence is. Well, that sounds fun. Yeah, that's really the secret agent I want to watch for 3 hours. You know, it'd be like if in Taken, after his daughter was kidnapped, Liam Neeson sat down and was like, well, I guess I'm just going to have a couple of drinks and listen to moody music for a while. No, that's not how it works. I mean, I'm being a little hard. Obviously, there were plenty of action sequences. It's not like stuff didn't get done. Evil was stopped. Badness didn't prevail. But it's just not fun anymore. And I just don't like Daniel Craig's James Bond anymore. I was excited about it when I first saw him. I love the movie Layer Cake, but you know what? Nihilistic, pointless, depressing movie. Layer Cake. Great movie. But if there's a moral to it, it's that nothing that Daniel Craig does in that movie actually matters to anyone. And he basically brings that whole nihilistic pointlessness back into James Bond. This might actually be a theme with Daniel Craig, come to think of it. Layer Cake, the James Bond movies, he played the guy and the girl with the dragon tattoo, which is actually not a nihilistic franchise, but the way he played Michael Blomkvist, you'd have a hard time knowing that. So anyway, I would like to see a different James Bond. Let me tell you what I would like to see. It's sort of a return to the Sean Connery, Roger Moore days, but it's a little bit different. I think we should make James Bond more of a nerd. Now, I know what you're saying. Kyle, you're insane right now. James Bond can't be a nerd. James Bond has to be cool. But if there's one thing I think that we've proven just very recently, groundbreakingly, in the last 5 years, it's that nerds actually can be cool. At least in pop culture. Well, no, I think we proved, well, I don't know. I'm still on the fence about it, but bear with me. So, I'm going to tell you a story. Nerdy guy likes building shit in his fancy garage, makes $1 billion doing it, invents all sorts of cool gadgets, changes the world, everybody loves him. Men want to be him, women want to sleep with him. I'm talking, of course, about Tony Stark and Iron Man. You know, Tony Stark did a better job of being James Bond in those movies than James Bond did in the James Bond movies. He's witty, he's funny, he hates women, but you can't tell. He does a generally good job of kicking bad guy ass, too. He gets kidnapped by terrorists, he improvises some gadgets, and he blows them the fuck up. That should be James Bond's job. Instead, James Bond's job apparently is sitting around looking moody. And I'm tired of it. So, I want a James Bond who's more like Iron Man. I want a James Bond who's more like Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg. What I mean by that is that we've redefined the standard of success. I'm sure that being a company man in the 1960s with an expense account, jet setting around the world, putting everything on MI6's tab was who every man wanted to be. It's the Don Draper vision of success, right? And Don Draper is another guy who's awesome until you think about his existence and realize how meaningless and pointless it is. And that's not... There's a place for that, but not with James Bond. James Bond is a colorful, larger-than-life ass-kicker. And I want to see more of that in his films. And so I think we need to sync up his persona, take all that masculinity, but fit it together with this new idea of success, which is sort of entrepreneurially driven. So here's my idea for a James Bond movie. James Bond is a nerdy, unassuming little guy, not unattractive, still hot, still wired, still able to kick ass, but not this big hulking, brooding predator like Daniel Craig. Just a little guy with glasses, and his smartphone in one hand, and his tablet in the other, and he's got 6 billion apps for Predator drones and automated sniper rifles on them, and one of them remote controls his car, and you'd like that guy. I promise. He's friendly, he smiles, he has a soft nose, he goes around pretending he's, Alright, picture this. This handsome but slightly nerdy little dude in glasses stumbles drunk out of a bar in Hong Kong, and you're thinking, and you see these 3 guys from a triad stalking him, and you're thinking, oh no, this guy's about to get one of his kidneys taken. And he's just sort of wandering because he's had too much vodka. He's suddenly in a bad part of town. He stumbles into an alley. There are some transvestite prostitutes in the corner. This is basically the dark side of The Hangover now. That was in Hong Kong. But anyway, so he's cornered, and all of a sudden, bam! Out comes the Walther PPK from a secret holster. He guns 3 of them down. It was all a trap for the guys who were stalking him because, unknown to everyone, this unassuming little guy is actually James Bond. That is how a spy should actually work. You shouldn't know he's this mad-ass killer with all these crazy skills until you're already dead. If you're able to figure it out beforehand, it sort of defeats the whole purpose of sending a spy, assassin, secret agent. I mean, when you think about it, the entire world of tech startup is so rife for espionage. I mean, think about encrypted tweets and messages on Facebook. Imagine James Bond hooking up with a woman over a very sexy exchange of text messages. I don't know. I might be going a little far here. I know he still has to be masculine and capable, but I'm just saying, I think that in the modern climate, a successful jet setter who has to make it into the kind of parties that James Bond has to make it into probably looks less like Daniel Craig and more like one of those guys you see giving a TED Talk. And that's just a fact. And so then the question is, well, can that guy be badass? And again, as I feel like we've learned, that is actually the case. If there's one thing that Doctor Who has shown us time and time again in recent years, it's that a nerdy little British guy can in fact kick all sorts of ass if you underestimate him. And so that's what I'd like to see. A softer James Bond, a happier James Bond, a more innovative James Bond. I mean, he doesn't have to have the invisible car from like the last Pierce Brosnan movie. That was going a little far. But just think, if you're a man whose job it is, at least on the surface, to carry around gadgets, how much easier that makes Q's job to give you killer gadgets. So I think it's an obvious union. Nerdy little guy, master assassin, bam, new James Bond. Now, full disclosure, is this version of James Bond an idealized version of myself? Yes, of course. But isn't that who James Bond is supposed to be? That's my whole point. The James Bond that Ian Fleming wrote was an idealized version of himself. You can tell from the way he's described. If you look at photos of Ian Fleming and then the description of James Bond, they're clearly the same guy. And Sean Connery was the idealized version of who every dude in the 1960s with a pulse wanted to be. So the question is, who does everyone want to be now? I bet there are more people out there like me who want to be the version of James Bond I've just described than want to be whatever idealized version of mankind, and man in particular, Daniel Craig is supposed to be. That's all I'm saying.